The old woman looked at Simon Cowell from the center of the stage and said, "You did, love. You did." Simon's chair scraped backward. He stood up. His mouth opened and closed, and nothing came out. 15 years behind that table. 15 years of having the right word for every moment. Not this one. Not tonight. Another Tuesday night taping. The Pasadena Civic Auditorium, packed to the last seat. 3,000 people filling every row. Cameras rolling, lights up full. Millions watching from living rooms across the country. Another hopeful contestant stepping into the spotlight. Another story waiting to be told. Another ordinary night on America's Got Talent, or so every single person in that building believed. Simon sat behind the judge's table in his black shirt, arms folded, that familiar expression of measured skepticism holding steady across his face. Howie Mandel was leaning back. Heidi Klum had her chin in her hand, smiling at the crowd. Sofia Vergara was talking quietly to Heidi. The audience rustled and settled. Another audition, another beginning, another Tuesday. The woman who walked out was not what anyone expected. She was 73 years old, small, upright. She moved with the careful dignity of someone who had learned long ago that you do not rush through a room just because someone else is in a hurry. Her name was Margaret Holloway. She wore a navy blue dress with a white collar. Her silver hair was pinned back neatly. She carried nothing, no instrument, no prop, just herself, walking slowly to the center of the stage, and the faint sound of her shoes on the floor. Terry Crews crossed the stage to meet her with a wide, gentle smile. "Hello there. And who do we have?" "Margaret," she said, clear, unhurried. "Margaret Holloway, from Tulsa, Oklahoma." "Margaret from Tulsa?" Terry beamed. "How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?" 73, she said. "And I don't mind at all." The audience applauded warmly. Simon watched her. He had not unfolded his arms. "What are you going to do for us tonight, Margaret?" She looked out at the audience for a moment. Then she looked back at Terry. "I'm going to sing," she said. "But I need to do something first." Terry tilted his head. "Go right ahead." She turned, not to the crowd. She turned toward the judge's table. Her eyes moved past Howie, past Heidi, past Sophia, and settled on Simon. She held his gaze for a moment that felt much longer than it was. "Before I sing," she said, "I need to say thank you to someone in this room." Terry's voice softened. "Who are you singing for tonight, Margaret?" She was quiet for just a beat. Her hands were still at her sides. "I'm singing for my late husband, Gerald," she said, "who left me with nothing when I was 44 years old. 3 children, a rented house, and no idea what came next." She paused. "And I'm singing for the man who quietly made sure that nothing didn't swallow us whole." A low, collective sound moved through the crowd. Not applause. Something older than applause. Simon's arms uncrossed. Slowly, he placed his hands flat on the table. He leaned forward. "Can you tell us more?" Terry asked gently. Margaret nodded once. "Gerald didn't die," she said. "I want to be clear about that. He just left. One Tuesday morning, he put his things in a bag and walked out the door and didn't come back. My youngest was 9, my oldest was 15. I had $62 in my purse and rent due in 3 weeks. She stopped, drew a breath. I had worked in television production for 12 years, crew work, catering, and hospitality on set. That was how I kept us fed. She looked at Simon again. And someone who barely knew my name made a phone call that changed everything. She reached into the small pocket at the front of her dress. She took out a folded envelope, cream-colored, worn soft at the edges from years of handling. She walked to the judge's table. She set it in front of Simon Cowell and stepped back. The room went completely still. Simon looked down at the envelope. He recognized nothing about it at first. He picked it up carefully. He opened it. He pulled out the single page inside and read it. And then, in 15 seasons of that show, it had never happened. Simon Cowell pushed back his chair and stood up. He walked around the end of the judge's table. He stepped down onto the stage floor. He stood in front of Margaret Holloway. Howie Mandel's hand went flat on the table. Heidi Klum pressed both palms to her cheeks. Sofia Vergara gripped Heidi's arm. The audience held its breath as one body. Simon looked at Margaret, and Margaret looked at Simon. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was steady. And she said it again, the same way she had said it the first time, quietly, plainly, for every person in that building to hear. "You did, love. You did." To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 29 years earlier. The year was 1996. Simon Cowell was 36 years old and building something. Not yet the household name, not yet the face the whole world recognized, but moving, always moving. A record label, a television development deal, meetings in Los Angeles and London and back again. He was hungry in the way that men are hungry when they are certain they are headed somewhere, and not yet certain exactly where. He was consulting on a talent program being piloted in Los Angeles. The crew was assembled quickly, the way pilot crews always are. Experienced people. People who knew how to make something out of very little. Margaret Holloway was one of them. She ran the on-set catering and craft services. She was 44 years old. Efficient, cheerful. The kind of woman who remembered how everyone took their coffee and made the day move smoothly without anyone noticing how much work that actually required. Simon noticed. He noticed because he was always paying attention, even when it didn't look like it. Gerald Holloway walked out on a Wednesday morning in March. Margaret learned about it when she came home from a 14-hour day on set to find his closet half empty and a note on the kitchen table. 3 sentences. He was sorry. He had to go. He wasn't coming back. The youngest child, a boy named Paul, found her sitting at the kitchen table at midnight, still holding the note. She told him to go back to bed. She sat there until 4 in the morning, and then she got up, made lunches, and drove her children to school. She came back to set the next day. She did not tell anyone. She did the job. She smiled. She remembered the coffee. It was a production coordinator named Elaine who finally noticed. 3 weeks later, Margaret's hands were shaking as she poured hot water. She spilled it. She stood there staring at the mess without moving. Elaine took her to a quiet corner and Margaret told her. All of it. The note. The $62. The rent. The 3 children. The fact that she had called her sister in Memphis and her sister had no room. The fact that she did not know what she was going to do. Elaine told Simon that evening. She wasn't sure why she told him exactly. She supposed she thought he might know someone who could help. Simon did not ask who might know someone. He picked up the phone himself. He called the production company's housing liaison and arranged for Margaret's rent to be covered for 6 months. He called a contact at a local employment agency and made sure she was flagged for any steady catering work that came through. He spoke to the pilot's director and ensured that Margaret was offered a contract on the full series, should it go to order, which it did. He set up a small, quiet educational trust for her 3 children. Not enormous. Enough. Enough for the things that gap between nothing and something required. He did all of it in 2 days. He told no one. When his business manager flagged the expenses and raised an eyebrow, Simon said simply, "She showed up to work." The manager waited for more. No more came. He never brought it up to Margaret. He did not want her gratitude. He did not want her to feel the weight of what he had done every time she saw him on set. He wanted her to be able to just work. Just breathe. So he acted through third parties. He never signed his name to a single piece of it. Margaret knew someone had helped her. She was a practical woman. She could see the shape of what had happened. But she did not know who. Not for certain. Not for 29 years. Then, last spring, Elaine passed away. She was 81 years old. She left Margaret a letter. In it, she told her everything. Margaret sat in her kitchen in Tulsa and read that letter 4 times. She had her own grandchildren now. Her youngest son, Paul, was 38. Her oldest, a daughter named Cowell, was 44. The same age Margaret had been the night she sat alone at the kitchen table holding Gerald's 3-sentence note. She looked at Cowell across the table and thought about what her life would have been if no one had made those phone calls. She thought about it for a long time. Her granddaughter was the one who suggested she audition for America's Got Talent. Margaret had been singing in her church choir for 40 years. She had a voice that had steadied 3 children through impossible nights. Built not in concert halls, but in kitchens and cars and small rooms. The only audience that ever mattered was the people who needed to hear it. She had never performed for strangers in her life. She filled out the application. She tucked Elaine's letter, the one that named Simon, into a cream envelope. She pressed it smooth and put it in her dress pocket. He thought that was the end of the story. Until tonight. Now Simon stood on the stage floor in front of a 73-year-old woman from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and neither of them spoke. The room was so quiet you could hear the lights humming. He looked at the letter in his hand. He looked at her. He had not thought about those phone calls in decades. He had not thought of them as a story. He had thought of them as an afternoon, 2 days of work, something obvious that needed doing. She had carried it for 29 years. His jaw tightened. His eyes went bright. And then Simon Cowell started to cry. The man who had built a career on always knowing exactly what to say. The judge who had spent 15 seasons keeping everything at arm's length. Not carefully, not quietly. His eyes filled, and the tears came, and he let them. Margaret reached out and put her hand on his arm the way a grandmother does. Steady, sure, like she was the one holding him up. "I needed you to know," she said, while I still had time to say it. Simon covered her hand with his. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Share this story if it moved you, and subscribe so you never miss moments like these. Howie Mandel was on his feet. Heidi Klum was crying openly, both hands over her mouth. Sofia Vergara had tears streaming down her face and made no effort to stop them. Terry Crews stood at the edge of the stage with one hand pressed against his chest, not saying a word. 3,000 people were standing. The sound in that room was not applause exactly. It was something that rises up when a large group of people witnesses something true. Simon stepped back. He looked at Margaret. He nodded once, just once, and returned to his seat. Margaret turned to face the audience. She closed her eyes. She stood very still for a moment. And she sang. She sang an old hymn, the kind that doesn't need accompaniment because it was written to be carried by a single human voice in an ordinary room. She sang it the way she had sung it for 40 years. Not for effect, not for performance. Because the song was true, and her voice was the most honest instrument she had. It was not perfect. There was a quiver in the high notes that came from 73 years of living. She did not iron it out. She let it stay. When she finished, the silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then the building came apart. Simon Cowell reached forward and pressed the golden buzzer without a word. Gold paper fell from the ceiling in great cascading sheets. Margaret Holloway stood in the middle of it and laughed. A real laugh, surprised and full. The kind that belongs only to people who are not expecting joy and got it anyway. Her son Paul was in the wings. He walked out onto the stage and put his arms around his mother and held on. In the weeks that followed, Simon made no announcement. He gave no interview. He did quietly establish a small fund in Margaret's name, directed towards single-parent families in crisis, administered through a housing charity in Tulsa. No publicity attached. Margaret was told about it by a charity representative who gave her no name to go with the donation. She knew anyway. She has had dinner with Simon twice since the show aired. A quiet restaurant. No cameras. He asks about Paul and Carol and the grandchildren by name, because he looked them all up before she arrived. There is a cream envelope in the top drawer of Simon's desk. He has never framed it. He does not need to. He knows what it says. He keeps it there because some things should not be put behind glass. Some people walk into a room and take the air out of it. Some walk in and leave the air better than they found it. Margaret Holloway has been doing that for 73 years. It just took one Tuesday night for the rest of the world to see it.